The European Court took a swipe at religious dress today by upholding a ban on full-face Islamic veils in France. The case was brought before the court by a woman identified only as SAS, a 24-year-old Muslim living in France, who claimed that her right to wear the burqa and niqab had been contravened. The French law banning clothing concealing the face entered into force in 2011 and applies to any veil which would make it impossible to identify the person. But the complainant took the case to the European Court, citing the right to respect for private life and the right of freedom of thought, conscience and religion, Articles 8 and 9 respectively of the European Convention on Human Rights. The European Court responded that the French law didn't breach the convention. Myriam François-Cherrat is a French journalist and commentator. She isn't surprised with this ruling.
You can't sort of take away from the fact that the rise of the far right has meant that the issue of Islam as a political pawn within broader debates is consistently being raised, and that in itself presents the Muslim community and Muslims and Islam perhaps more generally as some sort of intractable problem that needs to be resolved by the political class, therefore feeding really into a sense of hostility towards Muslims and towards symbols of the community.
While the French government maintained the law was important to safeguard secularism, Muslims in Europe see the banning of the veil as an attack on their human rights. Arzu Merali is head of research at the Islamic Human Rights Commission. She says this sends out a worrying signal about the nature of human rights.
Whilst the court had actually recognised in their judgment that a form of discrimination had essentially taken place, they felt that it was kind of reasonable, and that sends out quite alarming messages about what it means to be Muslim in Europe today. They seem to be shifting towards a point where the values of human rights are no longer universal, and that somehow there can be a margin for discrimination which is okay, and that can only send out the message that some people are not deemed to be as human as others, that there is an inequality in those human rights discourses and regimes.
Secularism, or laïcité in French, has been vehemently maintained by the French government, who put in place a previous ruling in 2004 banning all overt forms of religious symbolism in public schools. That included large crosses and Sikh turbans as well as the Islamic veil, but the law was largely flouted. The law referred to in the above case applies only to those veils that completely conceal the face, such as the burqa and niqab, and not to headscarves. Imtiaz Shams is a commentator on Muslim affairs in Britain and a former Muslim. He says a law like this could backfire.
In terms of human rights, no one's going to deny if you want to wear something and you're not able to wear it publicly, then potentially that could contravene human rights. If it's being forced on you, that in itself is a contravention of human rights as well. If you ban it in public places, sometimes you're restricting their ability to integrate with society. Because if their parents don't want them, for example, to leave without a niqab or hijab, they'll just shut them in the house.
Similar cases have arisen in the European Court involving Italy, Switzerland and the UK, and the wearing of religious clothing in schools, universities, security checks and the workplace. In the wake of the murder of the soldier Lee Rigby in Woolwich, attacks on Muslims increased almost fourfold, according to a study by the University of Teesside. The Collective Against Islamophobia in France reported that 77% of Islamophobic acts targeted veiled women. Arzu Merali from the Islamic Human Rights Commission again.
If we are really talking about having an inclusive society, we need to be able to deal with people coming from different faiths or none, different cultural values, that we, perhaps cannot agree with at all. But if they are participating in society without actually causing, some kind of immediate violent threat, then we have to actually be able to deal with that. That is actually the case of living together, as opposed to what the French state has claimed it's imposing on everybody, which is a kind of very, very particular space of living together, which is actually very exclusionary when you look at the reality of it.
France has the largest Muslim population in Western Europe, but some of the strictest laws governing expressions of faith in public. The European Court's decision that this issue is a choice of society has sent a strong message to Muslim communities in Europe, that it won't side with those who choose to dress in an overtly religious manner.